Our story opens at the twins after the meeting of Catelyn Stark and Walder Frey as they discuss terms for Robb's crossing into the south. Catelyn relays the news to her son. All of Walder Frey's demands. One of his sons will be a squire in the war, another will marry his sister Arya when she's been saved from the Lannisters, and if he's really serious about making this crossing south, he will also marry one of Lord Walder's daughters. Now, there is a catch to this deal. If Robb really wants his crossing, he'll marry one of Lord Walder's daughters now, before he even thinks about making the trip south to attack the Lannisters. This is a smart and calculated move by the late Walder Frey. By ensuring Robb marries one of his daughters now, instead of waiting until the war is over, this forces Robb to adhere to the terms of his agreement. He can't spend months away at war, taking advantage of the Riverlord's bridge to aid in his war effort, just to break his oath for a woman who has no real standing in any of the kingdoms of Westeros. It's a great way to ensure that Robb won't bail on them after utilizing their resources with no return on their investments. However, as reasonable as this sounds, there is a more slimy and self-serving reason as to why Lord Walder pushes so heavily for this marriage to happen right now. If Robb were to marry one of his daughters and as heir to the ruling house of Winterfell somehow died in the conflict, this would give the Freys the opportunity to take over the north through Walder's grandchild. So, in a way, this deal is less about making sure Robb stays committed to their deal and more about setting his family up for success in the long run, whether Robb wins or loses this war. But he won't be saying that out loud, and Robb has to be prepared for marriage within the coming week. Like Canon, he asked his mother if she got a good look at Walder's daughters, wanting to know who he's going to be attaching his future to for the rest of his life. Catelyn hints, however, that none of the girls, at least from who she saw, were the most appealing to look at. But, for better or worse, their appearance doesn't really matter, as Lord Walder Frey has already decided on a suitable bride for Robb to marry, though Lady Stark didn't get a chance to look at her. This, of course, concerns Robb, as he may be getting married to a woman he doesn't really favor. But, as the deal was already struck, there's no going back now, and causing a fuss about who he gets to marry could end his war effort before it truly begins. He can only pray to the old gods that things go well, and he's been given a suitable bride. So time passes, and Robb, his mother, his friend Theon, and his northern allies gather at the twins for a wedding, but less red in its nature. And while things go well, without a hint of treachery in the air, as at this point in the story, no one has any real incentive to stab the young wolf in the back, Robb is still very nervous as he stands before all in attendance and unveils his new bride, the Lady Roslin Frey. Unlike the canon timeline, Lord Walder doesn't hide her away and use her as some petty jab against Robb by giving her away to his uncle. From the moment he accepts the deal, Robb is given what he wants, a pretty girl that he could possibly fall in love with, while also being able to see his duty through. At the sight of her, all of Robb's worries begin to fade away, as he's given what he hoped for this entire time. That being said, Robb and Roslin would take fairly well to each other, since they're both in the same age group, and Robb is a pretty nice guy, and Roslin, from what we've seen of her, seems like a pretty decent girl in comparison to the rest of her family, even though we don't really see much of her after the events of the Red Wedding. But I digress. With his wedding done, his marriage sealed, and his crossing secure, Robb ventures through the Riverlands to the south in hopes of avenging his father and saving his sisters. However, even with marrying Roslin Frey, I don't find that there would be too many differences to the beginning of Robb's war campaign, his bid for northern justice and independence. Like the canon timeline, after crossing into the south and making his move against the Lannisters, Robb comes face to face with Jaime Lannister in battle, facing his forces at the Whispering Wood, winning and taking him as a hostage. Ned Stark still dies in King's Landing during this time, and with his death, Robb rises as Lord of Winterfell, and after Stannis and Renly make their individual claims for the Iron Throne, Robb rises as the king in the north, his people declaring, Independence from the crown, believing that with the Targaryens gone and Ned dead at the hands of the supposed Baratheon, they owe the South no allegiance. One key difference, however, to Robb's war is that in this timeline, he's married a lot. Earlier, and his new wife Roslin would be accompanying him on the battlefield. The main reason for this is so Robb can sire an heir, so should the worst happen, the Northern Crown won't die with him. Roslin accompanying Robb on the battlefield is something that would have been backed up by and heavily influenced by the late Walder Frey. Cowardly man as he is, he knows an opportunity when he sees one, and he wants Robb to have an heir just as badly as the king in the north himself. Like I said earlier, this child is an insurance policy. Should Robb die, the Freys could claim the north for themselves. But there is another darker motivation here. While not planning to betray Robb at the moment, the Freys are considering their options in case they need to disentangle themselves from the young wolf. Walder Frey is an opportunist first and foremost, so this is stuff that's going to be in his mind. If Roslin conceives an heir for House Stark, this could give the Freys incentive to give Robb the axe themselves, provided they have the right motivation. This could get them Winterfell and good relations with the crown if they take care of Robb, but that's only in the worst-case scenario. And at the moment, Lady Roslin shows no signs of pregnancy. Robb's war plan, though, doesn't change drastically with the appearance of his new wife, and he still makes similar pitfalls like he did in the canon timeline, like sending Theon back to the Iron Islands in hopes that he can gain his father's ships so that they may attack the Lannisters. Like before, Theon betrays the trust of his best friend and self-proclaimed brother, assaulting the North with his father's Ironborn and capturing Winterfell for his own. Robb dispatches the Bolton to reclaim his family home, and Rose leads the process to his son Ramsay, who delights in potentially taking Theon hostage. Bran and Rickon, aided by Osha and Hodor, will escape the clutches of Theon later on, and the hands of the Boltons, since they will sack Winterfell after Theon has been dealt with, and likely would have killed the boys if they had found them. Even with the Freys standing by Robb in this timeline and no allies to aid him in their treason, I still see Rose trying to screw over Robb in any way he can, even if it's not likely to be a dagger in the heart in this timeline. Still, even without that knife, the loss of Winterfell alone is damaging enough for Robb, at least politically speaking, as what is a king without his capital. Even if he does get it back in the end, the betrayal of a man he embraced as a brother is something that he won't get over easily. And with the North being raided by the Ironborn, this adds more issues to Robb's campaign. But, as we know, he can't turn back to try and solve this problem, as that will be a demoralizing blow to all of his efforts when it comes to his army. So he continues to fight in the Riverlands. House Frey will provide some advantage to Robb in this field, as he now has more men and ways to fend off Lannister soldiers. But a hard truth to know is that even with the Freys at his side, the odds would still be stacked against Robb as he pushes further into the war. A lot of his problems still happen for him, regardless of whether or not he has the Freys on his side. There are just some things that are out of his control entirely. A great example of this is the situation with Jaime Lannister. Robb, being married to Roslin Frey, most likely wouldn't change the fact that he would be getting released by Catelyn. King Robb would have still sent his mother Catelyn to meet with Renly Baratheon in hopes of gaining more allies against the Lannisters. But before an agreement could be reached, Renly would be killed by his own brother, and Brienne would enter the service of Lady Catelyn Stark. As a result, Brienne would be trusted by Catelyn to see Jaime Lannister back to King's Landing in hopes of saving her daughters from the Lannisters. Regardless of Robb's new marriage, Catelyn is still very stressed out, having two of her daughters held hostage in King's Landing, to her knowledge at least, and having two more of her children go missing after the sack of her family home. She's desperate for any kind of win for her family. And even with the Frey alliance still intact, I doubt it has any logical reason to have an impact on her decision to free Jaime. So the man is freed, and this later leads to retaliation from the Karstarks, who rebel against Robb. Rickard, angry about the death of two of his sons at the hands of Lannisters, kills two Lannister squires in revenge, and Robb executes him like he did in canon. Robb loses the Karstarks like he did before, but a difference in this timeline is that with his marriage to Roslin, losing the Karstarks doesn't seal his fate. Originally, after losing this grand portion of his army, he went crawling back to Walder Frey for help to make up the losses, which opened him up to being betrayed at the Red Wedding, as the Freys wanted retribution for their broken oath, and the Boltons were tired of working for a Stark. While the Boltons might still have their own subtle schemes at play, the Freys wouldn't pose that much of an issue to Robb at this point, since they have no real incentive to betray Robb. And, even if they did, their plans of having high influence in the north requires him being alive long enough for Roslin to get pregnant. After the desertion of the Karstarks from his army, Robb needs more men, and so he sends a letter to his new father-in-law to supply them. Since, at this point in the war, Robb really doesn't have too many options when it comes to allies. At this point in the story, Renly has been murdered by his own brother, the Tyrells have joined the Lannisters, and Stannis has been beaten at the Battle of the Blackwater. And knowing him, there is no way that Stannis would ever align himself with Robb. After losing his bannermen, I'm sure joining forces with Stannis would be a topic of conversation brought up to the king in the north, as even with the Freys around, they still aren't the most powerful of assets. But Robb will refuse to reach out to Stannis, as aligning with him likely means having to give up the crown, if not in name, then in practice. After all, this was the case with Renly, since it would have allowed Robb to call himself King of the North, but only as long as he still served the crown, therefore removing the weight of his title. He has every reason to believe that it would be exactly the same or worse if he decided to work with Stannis, especially given his reputation about duty and being as unbending as iron. So even without alienating the Freys and putting off the Red Wedding, Robb is still not in the best position when it comes to the War of the Five Kings. And after the loss of Stannis at King's Landing, Robb really has to consider what to do next. With himself lacking in allies and having to go up against the combined might of House Lannister and Tyrell, not to mention Tywin working on relations with Dorne, any further assault on the south may seem foolhardy at best. He's facing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and meeting them in an open field could spell the end of his life and northern independence. But he can't just sit around, considering that the Lannisters won't waste their advantage. Robb has a couple of options in this scenario. He could stay where he is, hold up, and fortify the Riverlands as he waits for the crown to attack. From there, he can try to do what he did when the war first started. Draw out the crown's forces and whittle them down with ambushes and sneak attacks. But considering the size of the armies he'd be facing, this would be a big risk, as who knows if he may or may not be overwhelmed. But if he managed to take out their leadership in one of these encounters, like Tywin for instance, this could give him an advantage, since he's the only thing holding the Lannisters together. The other option he has at this point is turning his army around and holding up in the north. This could seem smart, because the soldiers of the Reach and Westerlands wouldn't be used to fighting here. As Cersei once said to her son, Joffrey, "It's too big and too cold for outsiders to handle, especially those that hail from warmer climates and are used to abundance." And with the Ironborn around, there is also a chance that the Crown's forces could get into skirmishes with them while trying to take Winterfell. In the north, they could reasonably be worn down if they go back north. But the only issue with this is, not only would it be demoralizing for Robb to turn his army around, it would also mean abandoning the Riverlands. With Robb and his forces gone, the Riverlands would essentially be at the mercy of the Crown's forces. And Robb doesn't want to leave his family behind. And with his marriage to Roslin Frey, he would also feel a sense of obligation to protect the homeland of his wife's family. If the Crown comes, there is no doubt that they're going to come for the Freys too, since they made their marriage pact with Robb and actively participated in his treason by making Roslin a queen. So with that in mind, Robb opts to stay in the Riverlands, doing his best to keep the place secure and making plans for guerrilla tactics that can be employed to wear down the Lannister-Tyrell alliance whenever they make their move. But, despite being at such a disadvantage here, there would be some good things that happen for Robb in the middle of this war. It would take some time, but eventually Roslin Frey falls pregnant with Robb Stark's child. This would be great news for Robb at the moment, given his dire situation. Because if something happens to him, the Northern Crown will still live on through his child. This is also great news for the Freys, because this child is the key to Northern influence. However, there aren't any plans to betray Robb at the moment. For starters, as promising as this pregnancy would be, the kid hasn't even been born yet, and there's no telling if the birth will even go well in the future at all. Second, while the idea of a betrayal is something that Walder Frey would toy with, it's important to remember that in this show, even after Robb broke his oath to the Freys, Walder was still hesitant about going through with the Red Wedding because of the political backlash that he would face. The only reason that he went through with it is because of the assurances that Tywin gave him. So even if a northern usurping was on the brain, a hostile takeover, like I said earlier in the video, would be a last resort, especially since, at this point, I don't believe that Tywin would have ever reached out to the Freys to orchestrate the Red Wedding. He only did that because they had a falling out with Robb. But with Roslin married to him now, and the families on relatively good terms, I doubt Tywin would ever even plant the seed in their heads. That being said, Robb's life is guaranteed, for the time being. All right, let's dive into the meat of this alternate timeline. We've got Robb married to Roslin Frey, war raging, and enough scheming to make Littlefinger blush. What happens next? Let's find out. So, Robb Stark, now hitched to Roslin Frey, is knee-deep in the War of the Five Kings. The wedding's done, the alliance with the Freys is secured, and he's marched his army south to take on the Lannisters. But, let's be real, marrying Roslin doesn't magically solve all his problems. He's still got the Ironborn raiding the north, the Lannisters breathing down his neck, and Rose Bolton lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to, well, Bolton things. The early battles play out pretty much as we know them. Robb, the brilliant young commander, outmaneuvers the Lannister forces. He still captures Jaime Lannister at the Whispering Wood, dealing a major blow to Tywin Lannister's war effort. News of Ned Stark's execution still reaches the north, solidifying their resolve for independence and leading to Robb's declaration as king in the north. Now, here's where things get a little different. With Roslin by his side, Robb's not just fighting for vengeance and independence, he's also thinking about succession. He needs an heir, and Walder Frey is subtly, or not so subtly, reminding him of that fact. Roslin's presence on the battlefield, or at least relatively close to it, becomes a constant reminder of this duty. It's a pressure Robb didn't have in the original timeline. Think about it. Robb's a young man, leading an army, trying to win a war, and he's got his wife and her entire family subtly pushing him to produce an heir. It's a whole new level of stress, and let's not forget Walder Frey's motivations. A Stark heir with Frey blood is basically a golden ticket for House Frey, guaranteeing their power and influence in the north, regardless of how the war ends. But here's the thing. Walder Frey isn't just thinking about the best-case scenario. He's Walder Frey. He's always got a backup plan, and a backup plan for his backup plan. With Roslin constantly near Robb, she is also a good spy for him, feeding him details of troop movements and morale amongst the men. He may not be actively plotting Robb's downfall yet, but he's certainly considering his options. What if Robb dies without an heir? What if the Lannisters offer him a better deal? Walder Frey always keeps his options open. Meanwhile, back in the north, Theon Greyjoy is still making terrible decisions. Despite Robb's marriage to Roslin, Theon's ambition and daddy issues haven't magically disappeared. He still betrays Robb, seizing Winterfell and throwing the north into chaos. Robb, of course, is furious. he dispatches Rose Bolton to deal with the Ironborn, setting in motion the events that lead to the sack of Winterfell and the escape of Bran and Rickon. And speaking of Rose Bolton, let's not forget about him. He's still a snake in the grass, playing both sides and waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The Frey alliance doesn't change his fundamental nature. He's still Rose Bolton, and he's still looking for ways to advance his own position, even if it means undermining Robb's war effort. Even without the Red Wedding looming over him, Rose is subtly sowing discord, spreading rumors, and generally making Robb's life more difficult. He might not be planning a full-blown betrayal yet, but he's certainly laying the groundwork for one. The loss of Winterfell, even temporarily, is a major blow to Robb's credibility as king in the north. It weakens his position and gives Rose more leverage. So Robb is facing enemies on all sides. The Lannisters in the south, the Ironborn in the north, and Rose Bolton lurking in the shadows. He's got the Freys on his side, but their loyalty is conditional, and Walder Frey is always looking for an advantage. He captures Jaime, the Kingslayer, winning an early victory, but Tywin will want him back. And just like in the original timeline, Catelyn makes a decision that has huge consequences. Despite Robb's marriage to Roslin, Catelyn is still driven by her desire to save her daughters. She still believes that freeing Jaime is the only way to get Sansa and Arya back from the Lannisters. So, she does it. She releases Jaime, defying Robb's orders and setting off a chain of events that will have far-reaching consequences. The release of Jaime Lannister still enrages Rickard Karstark, leading to the murder of the Lannister prisoners and Karstark's subsequent execution. Robb loses a significant portion of his army, further weakening his position. In the original timeline, this loss was a major factor in Robb's decision to seek refuge with the Freys, ultimately leading to the Red Wedding. But in this timeline, things are different. Robb is already married to Roslin. He doesn't need to break his oath to the Freys. So, instead of crawling back to Walder Frey, he sends a letter requesting reinforcements. He needs men to replace the Karstark soldiers, and the Freys are his only reliable ally at this point. Walder Frey, of course, is happy to provide reinforcements. It's another opportunity to increase his influence and solidify his position. But he's also thinking about the long game. He's watching Robb closely, assessing his strengths and weaknesses, and calculating his next move. With Renly Baratheon dead, the Tyrells allied with the Lannisters, and Stannis defeated at the Blackwater, Robb is running out of options. He's facing the combined might of the Lannister-Tyrell alliance, and he's outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Robb is in a tight spot and is running out of options. Does he continue to fight in the Riverlands, risking a decisive defeat? Or does he retreat to the north, abandoning his allies and ceding ground to the enemy? Both options are fraught with danger. Staying in the Riverlands means facing a superior force. Retreating to the north means abandoning the Riverlands to the Lannisters. But that is not the only thing that he has to worry about. Theon still occupies Winterfell. He chooses to stay in the Riverlands, hoping to wear down the Lannister-Tyrell alliance through guerrilla warfare. He knows it's a risky strategy, but he sees no other choice. But despite the bleak situation, there's a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Roslin Frey is pregnant. This news is a huge boost for Robb's morale, and for the North in general. An heir to Winterfell would ensure the continuation of the Stark line, giving hope to those who are ready to give up. It would also cement the alliance between the Starks and the Freys, securing their loyalty for generations to come, or so it seems. As promising as it seems, things still remain the same, since the heir hasn't even been born yet, meaning there's no telling if anything will even go wrong during childbirth. Plus, there is still no talk about a Lannister surrender. But even with this news, there is more good that comes from all of this. Arya Stark arrives back at Riverrun, being escorted by Sandor Clegane. This marks a huge moment in the war as Catelyn gets to embrace her daughter once more. Although it is not Sansa, the fact still remains that one of her children has made it home. But the joy from this event is short-lived when they learn that Sansa is being held hostage still in King's Landing. Catelyn realizes that she freed Jaime for nothing, and this created another rift between Robb and his mother. Although Arya is back, Robb still doesn't trust Sandor since he used to work for the Lannisters, and as such he keeps him under close guard until he has gotten all the information that he needs from the Hound. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Jaime and Brienne are discussing what to do with Sansa and come to the conclusion that Jaime must get her out of King's Landing. But plans change when Joffrey is poisoned, leading to Sansa escaping King's Landing with Littlefinger. Now with Sansa out of the picture and the Lannisters weakened by the death of Joffrey and Tywin, maybe Robb finally has the upper hand in the war. So, with Catelyn's blunder in the past and Arya's unexpected return to Riverrun, things are starting to look different. Not necessarily better, mind you, just different. The chessboard has been flipped, a few pieces knocked off, and now everyone's scrambling to figure out the new rules. First, let's talk about Jaime Lannister. Catelyn freeing him, even with Arya now safely back, is still a decision that's causing ripples. Word spreads like wildfire. The Kingslayer, the man who murdered her husband, set free? It's another blow to Robb's authority, another chink in the armor of the Northern cause. His bannermen, already restless, are now openly questioning his mother's judgment. Loyalty to family is one thing, they grumble, but this is outright treason. Robb spends countless hours trying to smooth things over, reminding them of the need to rescue Sansa, the importance of maintaining some semblance of honor even in wartime. But the whispers persist. And then there's Arya. Her reunion with Catelyn is, of course, bittersweet. Joy at finding her daughter alive is quickly tempered by the harsh realities Arya has faced. The stories she tells, of witnessing Ned's execution, of escaping King's Landing, of the horrors she saw on the road, they haunt Catelyn. It hardens her, makes her even more determined to see the Lannisters brought to justice. But Arya herself is changed. She's no longer the naive little girl who dreamed of being a lady. She's a survivor, wary and watchful. She trusts few, and the joy of being back with her family is mixed with a deep-seated unease. She remembers the faces of those who betrayed, her father, the cruelty of Joffrey, the chilling indifference of Cersei. These memories fuel a burning desire for revenge, a desire that worries Catelyn. She tries to instill in Arya the values of honor and justice, but she sees the darkness lurking in her daughter's eyes. The Hound, meanwhile, is a constant source of tension. Robb, despite Arya's assurances that Sandor Clegane saved her life, remains deeply suspicious. He's a Lannister dog, through and through, isn't he? Robb keeps him under heavy guard, questioning him relentlessly about Lannister strategies and troop movements. The Hound, for his part, offers little of value. He's no fool. He knows his life hangs by a thread. He provides vague answers, careful, not to reveal anything that could be truly useful, while also avoiding any blatant lies that might get him killed. He's playing a dangerous game, walking a tightrope between survival and damnation. Now let's shift our focus to King's Landing. Joffrey's death at his own wedding feast throws the entire city into chaos. Tyrion, as we know, is quickly accused of the crime. The political fallout is immense. The alliance between the Lannisters and the Tyrells, already strained by Joffrey's cruelty towards Margaery, is now teetering on the brink of collapse. Tywin Lannister, ever the pragmatist, attempts to hold things together. He needs the Tyrells' support to win the war, and he can't afford a messy divorce between Tommen and Margaery. He pushes for a swift trial, hoping to quickly convict Tyrion and move on. But things don't go as planned. Oberyn Martell's arrival in King's Landing throws a wrench into the works. He demands a trial by combat, eager to avenge the death of his sister Elia and her children. Tywin, recognizing the danger, tries to dissuade him, but Oberyn is relentless. The trial by combat is a brutal, bloody affair. Oberyn fights with skill and passion, seemingly on the verge of victory, but in a moment of arrogance he hesitates, giving the Mountain an opening. The Mountain, fueled by poison and pure rage, crushes Oberyn, confessing to the rape and murder of Elia Martell as he does so. Oberyn's death is a devastating blow to Tyrion, who now faces certain execution. Jaime, desperate to save his brother, makes a deal with Tywin. He will resign from the Kingsguard and return to Casterly Rock if Tywin spares Tyrion's life. Tywin agrees but secretly plots to break his promise. He intends to send Tyrion to the Wall, a fate almost as bad as death. Jaime, realizing that he can't trust his father, decides to take matters into his own hands. He frees Tyrion from his cell, setting in motion a chain of events that will forever alter the course of the war. Before fleeing, Tyrion confronts Tywin in the Tower of the Hand, where he discovers Shae in Tywin's bed. Enraged and heartbroken, Tyrion strangles Shae and then confronts his father, killing him with a crossbow. Tywin's death is a seismic event. He was the glue holding the Lannister regime together, the architect of their victories, the master manipulator of Westeros. With him gone, the Lannisters are vulnerable, their power fractured. Cersei, consumed by grief and paranoia, struggles to maintain control. Tommen, still a boy, is easily manipulated. The small council is filled with ambitious schemers, each vying for power. Now, back in Riverrun, Robb receives news of Joffrey's death and the chaos in King's Landing. Roslin, heavy with child, pleads with him to consider peace. "This war has gone on long enough," she says. "Too many lives have been lost. For your child, for the North, please, Robb, try to find a way to end this." Catelyn, too, urges Robb to seek a negotiated settlement. She sees the Lannisters crumbling, their grip on power weakening. "Now is the time to strike a deal," she argues. "We can secure Northern independence and perhaps even secure Sansa's release." Robb is torn. Part of him wants to push on, to exploit the Lannisters' weakness and crush them once and for all. But the other part of him, the part that cares for his people, the part that remembers the oaths he swore to protect them, knows that endless war is not the answer. He agrees to send envoys to King's Landing to open negotiations with Tommen. He sets his terms: Northern independence, the release of Sansa and Arya, and guarantees of safe passage for his envoys. The negotiations are fraught with difficulty. Cersei, still in mourning for Joffrey and enraged by Tywin's death, is vehemently opposed to any concessions. She wants to crush the North, to make an example of Robb Stark and his rebellion. Tommen, however, is more open to compromise. He's tired of the war, weary of the bloodshed. He sees the value in making peace, in securing stability for his kingdom. He's also influenced by Margaery, who has her own reasons for wanting the war to end. As the negotiations drag on, Littlefinger emerges from the shadows. He arrives at Riverrun offering his services as a mediator. He claims to be acting in the best interests of the realm, but Robb and Catelyn are wary. They know that Littlefinger is a master manipulator, a man who always has his own agenda. Littlefinger presents a compelling argument. He claims to have the ear of Lysa Arryn, the Lady of the Eyrie, and offers to secure her support for Robb's cause. He also hints at a potential alliance with Dorne, now that Oberyn Martell is dead. Robb is tempted. An alliance with the Vale, and Dorne could tip the balance of power in his favor. But he also knows that dealing with Littlefinger is like making a pact with the devil. He's a dangerous man, not to be trusted. Ultimately, Robb decides to take the risk. He agrees to meet with Lysa Arryn and representatives from Dorne, hoping to forge a new alliance that will secure Northern independence. He knows he's playing a dangerous game, but he sees no other way to achieve his goals. The future of the North and the fate of his family hangs in the balance. Meanwhile, Sansa, spirited away by Littlefinger after Joffrey's murder, remains hidden in the Eyrie under the protection of her aunt, Lysa Arryn. Lysa, driven by paranoia and a desperate desire to keep Littlefinger by her side, is fiercely protective of Sansa. She isolates her from the outside world, feeding her lies about the Lannisters and the Starks. Littlefinger, as always, has his own plans. He wants to use Sansa as a pawn in his Game of Thrones, to manipulate her into marrying Robb and Arryn and securing control of the Vale. He also sees her as a potential key to the North, should Robb Stark fall. Sansa, trapped in the Eyrie, feels increasingly isolated and desperate. She misses her family, longs for freedom, and yearns to escape Littlefinger's grasp. She knows that he's using her, manipulating her for his own ends. But she's powerless to stop him. As the war rages on and the negotiations continue, the fate of Westeros remains uncertain. The Lannisters are weakened, but not defeated. The Starks are fighting for survival, but face daunting odds. And Littlefinger, lurking in the shadows, is waiting for his opportunity to seize power. The Game of Thrones is far from over, and the stakes have never been higher. The turning tides have created new opportunities, but also new dangers. The future is uncertain, and only time will tell who will emerge victorious. Okay, here we go. With Joffrey now gone, I believe that Robb would be pushed by his mother and his pregnant wife, Roslin, to potentially try and sue for peace with King Tommen. He's young, untested, and with his grandfather dead, he doesn't really have much military guidance at his disposal, unless you want to count his father-in-law, Mace Tyrell, who isn't typically regarded as a great leader. That being said, the Lannisters only have the numbers but not the mind for battle, while Robb has the opposite. So Tommen may be willing to come to the table if Robb makes him an offer. Robb could send his terms for independence, and knowing how mild-mannered Tommen is, it is a possibility that he could consider granting the North independence. But it's also very likely that Cersei wouldn't allow him to do this. She has too much influence over Tommen to let him surrender and give up half of his kingdom. She would push him to crush the North as soon as possible, given that Robb lacks the fighting men, and this is the only reason that he's suing for peace in the first place. On another note, I believe that Sansa would eventually find her way back to the Starks at River Run. Originally, after being saved by Littlefinger, the plan was for her to marry her cousin, Robin Arryn, in one of his bids to secure control over the Vale and the North. But with the Starks alive, it makes me question if this plan would even make sense for Littlefinger now. I mean, Robin and Catelyn wouldn't be happy to find out that Sansa just got married without their consent, especially since they would find out that she escaped from King's Landing. And if they find out that Littlefinger was behind this could create more issues with him and the Starks. And, heck, even the Arryns, if they find out that he was involved in taking Sansa. And while we're on this topic of questionable marriage choices, I also don't see Sansa getting married to the Boltons in this timeline, as they have nothing to offer Littlefinger anymore. Even though they still may be planning against the Starks, they have no power or influence that could be of use to Peter Baelish. With the Starks still alive, Littlefinger's best bet is to make Lysa align herself with them. He keeps his hand, in this a secret, so he can continue playing both sides. But he makes Lysa give Sansa back to the Starks, and even offers the men of the Vale to support Robb in the war in exchange for Sansa marrying her cousin, Robin. The whole plan for Littlefinger here is that he wants the North and the Crown to take each other out, even if it means sacrificing some men from the Vale. This way, if Tommen is killed, it creates a vacancy on the Iron Throne, which he can claim himself if he plays his cards right. He'll also toy with the idea of orchestrating the deaths of Robb and his wife Roslin during this conflict. By eliminating Robb and his potential heirs, Sansa could claim the North for herself, with her other brothers believed to be dead. And if Littlefinger sticks to his plan of killing Lysa and becoming Lord Protector of the Vale, he could control the North and the Vale through Sansa and Robin. And if things go to plan, he could see himself crowned as King of the Seven Kingdoms. Then, if Sansa does inherit Winterfell after Robb's death, and she does marry her cousin Robin, thanks to Littlefinger's influence, he could very well crush this idea of northern independence through the two of them. Because with their marriage, and his new position, he effectively controls them. But let's rewind a bit and focus on those peace negotiations, shall we? Robb, ever the pragmatist, knows he has to explore every avenue for ending this bloody war. He's not just thinking about himself. He's thinking about Roslin, carrying his child, and the countless northern families who've already sacrificed so much. The letters are dispatched to King's Landing, carried under a white banner of truce, outlining Robb's terms. Independence for the North, the Riverlands to be left unmolested, and a general amnesty for all those who fought under his banner. The response, however, is far from conciliatory. Cersei, ever the puppet master, intercepts the messages, twisting Tommen's ear with tales of northern treachery and the need to crush the rebellion once and for all. She sees this as a moment of weakness, an opportunity to finally extinguish the Stark flame. But even Cersei can't completely ignore the whispers of dissent within her own ranks. Tyrell influence is growing, and the Highgarden contingent is weary of endless war. Mace Tyrell, though not a brilliant strategist, recognizes the potential benefits of a negotiated peace, a secure border, a stable realm, and continued prosperity for the Reach. It's in this climate of uncertainty that a small council is convened in King's Landing. Varys, ever the spider, subtly pushes for a measured response, highlighting the dangers of prolonged conflict and the potential for further unrest. Pycelle, ever the sycophant, parrots Cersei's hawkish rhetoric, calling for fire and blood. Meanwhile, back in the Riverlands, Robb receives word of the impasse. He knows that Cersei is the primary obstacle, her thirst for vengeance unquenchable. He also knows that he needs to strengthen his position, both militarily and politically, if he's to have any chance of swaying the crown. He focuses on fortifying Riverrun, bolstering his defenses and securing alliances with the remaining river lords. He sends envoys to the Eyrie, hoping to capitalize on Sansa's presence and forge a common cause against the Lannisters. He even considers reaching out to Dorne, but the wounds of the past run deep, and the Martells remain wary of northern overtures. It's during this period of waiting that Littlefinger's grand scheme begins to unfold. With Sansa safely ensconced in the Vale, he begins to subtly manipulate events, playing upon Lyssa's paranoia and Robin's naivete. He whispers of Lannister, plots and northern ambitions, fueling their distrust of both factions. His ultimate goal is to destabilize the region, creating a power vacuum that he can exploit. He orchestrates a series of minor incidents, framing the Lannisters for attacks on Vale villages and the Starks for inciting rebellion among the mountain clans. As tensions rise, Lysa becomes increasingly erratic, her grip on power weakening. Robin, easily swayed by Littlefinger's honeyed words, becomes a willing pawn in his game. He dispatches Vale Knights to harass northern patrols, further straining relations between the two regions. Robb, frustrated by the lack of progress in King's Landing and the growing unrest in the Vale, begins to contemplate a daring gambit. He proposes a secret meeting with key figures from both sides, hoping to cut through the political maneuvering and forge a genuine path to peace. He sends word to Mace Tyrell, appealing to his sense of reason and his desire for stability. He also dispatches a trusted envoy to the Vale, seeking a meeting with Lysa and Sansa. The message is simple. The war has gone on long enough. Let us meet and find a way to end the bloodshed. The response is mixed. Mace Tyrell, intrigued by the prospect of a negotiated settlement, agrees to send a representative to the meeting. Lysa, however, remains suspicious, her paranoia fueled by Littlefinger's constant whispers. She refuses to attend but allows Sansa to travel to the designated meeting place, a neutral location on the border between the Riverlands and the Vale. Littlefinger, sensing an opportunity to further his own agenda, subtly encourages Sansa to attend, knowing that her presence will add weight to the proceedings and potentially sway the outcome. He coaches her on what to say, subtly shaping her message to align with his own goals. The meeting takes place under the watchful eyes of Northern and Vale guards. Sansa, dressed in somber black, arrives accompanied by a small retinue of Vale knights. On the other side, a Tyrell representative, a seasoned diplomat named Ser Garland, awaits with a similar escort. The atmosphere is tense, the air thick with suspicion and distrust. Sansa, though young, carries herself with a newfound sense of dignity, the hardships of her past having forged her into a formidable presence. She speaks eloquently of the need for peace, of the suffering that the war has inflicted on both sides, and of the hope for a better future. Ser Garland, impressed by Sansa's sincerity, echoes her sentiments, stressing the importance of stability and the need to end the bloodshed. He presents Mace Tyrell's terms for peace, which include recognition of Tommen as the rightful king, a reduction in northern forces, and the establishment of a permanent trade agreement between the North and the Reach. Sansa, though disappointed by the Crown's demands, recognizes that they represent a starting point for negotiations. She proposes a counteroffer, suggesting a gradual withdrawal of northern forces, a joint effort to combat the Ironborn threat, and the establishment of a council to resolve future disputes. The negotiations drag on for days, the participants haggling over every detail, every word. Littlefinger, watching from afar, grows increasingly impatient. He knows that a genuine peace settlement would undermine his own ambitions, robbing him of the opportunity to exploit the chaos and seize power. He begins to subtly sabotage the negotiations, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of both sides, stirring up old grievances and reminding them of past betrayals. He dispatches assassins to harass the participants, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. As the negotiations reach a critical juncture, Littlefinger decides to make his move. He orchestrates a daring raid on the meeting place, using Vale Knights disguised as Northern soldiers. The attack throws the negotiations into chaos, shattering the fragile trust that had been built up over the past few days. Sansa, caught in the crossfire, is nearly killed, but is rescued by Ser Garland, who bravely defends her from the attackers. The attack effectively ends the negotiations, leaving both sides more suspicious and distrustful than ever before. Robb, enraged by the betrayal, vows to avenge the attack and bring the perpetrators to justice. He blames Littlefinger for the sabotage, unaware of his true role in the affair. He sends northern forces into the Vale, seeking to apprehend the culprits and restore order. Littlefinger, his plan having succeeded, retreats deeper into the Vale, leaving behind a trail of chaos and destruction. He knows that the war is far from over, and that the opportunity to seize power is still within his reach. He just needs to be patient, to wait for the right moment to strike. So, while Robb is trying to negotiate for peace, Littlefinger is actively undermining him at every turn. He's manipulating events in the Vale, positioning himself for greater power and exploiting the Starks' vulnerability. It's a dangerous game, and the stakes are higher than ever before. All right, so with all that said, where does this leave us? Well, with Robb in a significantly more stable, albeit still precarious position, he's got his heir on the way, Arya's back in the fold, and the Lannisters are reeling from a series of internal crises. But the war isn't over, and even with all these advantages, Robb still faces some daunting choices. Let's dive into some possible outcomes, shall we? First, let's consider the most optimistic scenario. Robb secures northern independence. The key here is how Tommen reacts to Robb's peace overtures. Let's say Cersei's influence wanes slightly after Tywin's death. Perhaps she becomes increasingly paranoid and isolated, focusing more on eliminating perceived threats within kings, landing than on external conflicts. This could create a power vacuum, allowing more moderate voices to reach Tommen. Now Tommen, being the gentle soul he is, and perhaps swayed by reasoned arguments from his small council, maybe even a hesitant Jaime, burdened by his Kingslayer past and seeking redemption, might actually consider Robb's terms. These terms would likely include formal recognition of northern independence, guarantees of Riverland's autonomy, and the return of Sansa Stark. In exchange, Robb would pledge to cease hostilities and possibly offer a symbolic tribute to the Iron Throne, something to appease the Southern Lords and save Tommen from looking weak. Now, this isn't a complete victory for Robb. He still made concessions, but he's achieved his primary goal, freedom for the North. He returns to Winterfell, not as a rebel, but as a legitimate king. Roslin gives birth to a healthy son, a future heir who will solidify the Stark dynasty. Arya, scarred by her experiences but grateful to be home, begins to train as a warrior, perhaps even learning from the Hound, who, still under guard but now slightly more trusted, begrudgingly imparts his combat skills. Catelyn, though still haunted by her mistakes, finds solace in having her children together again. Sansa, eventually freed by Littlefinger as we discussed, returns to the North, perhaps a little more hardened, a little more cynical, but ultimately ready to contribute to the rebuilding of her homeland. The North, though battered by war, begins to heal, focusing on rebuilding its economy and strengthening its defenses. Robb, a king forged in the fires of war, learns to be a wise and just ruler, guided by his counsel and the love of his family. This is the best-case scenario, a fragile peace built on compromise and a mutual desire for an end to bloodshed. But let's be realistic, shall we? The Game of Thrones rarely offers such straightforward happy endings. A more likely outcome involves a precarious compromise. Maybe Tommen, still influenced by Cersei but also wary of prolonging the war, offers a partial concession. Perhaps he grants the North a degree of autonomy, but not full independence. Robb might be allowed to rule the North as a warden, a position of considerable power, but still ultimately answerable to the Iron Throne. This would be a bitter pill to swallow for Robb, who initially sought complete liberation. However, facing the continued threat of the Lannister armies, and with his own forces depleted, he might be forced to accept this compromise as the best available option. In this scenario, the North remains part of the Seven Kingdoms, but enjoys significant self-governance. Robb focuses on consolidating his power within the North, rebuilding its infrastructure, and fostering trade relationships with other regions. Roslin remains his queen, but their relationship is perhaps strained by the compromise. She may feel that Robb has betrayed her family's loyalty by not securing full independence. Arya continues her training, but her thirst for vengeance remains unquenched. Sansa, scarred by her experiences in King's Landing and the Vale, becomes a valuable advisor to Robb, using her knowledge of courtly intrigue to navigate the treacherous political landscape. Catelyn, still burdened by guilt, dedicates herself to serving the North, perhaps focusing on charitable works and supporting the families of fallen soldiers. And what of Littlefinger, you ask? Well, he doesn't get to be king, but he's still very much a player in the game. He continues to consolidate his power in the Vale, positioning himself as a key intermediary between the North and the Iron Throne. He might even orchestrate marriages between Northern and Vale families, further solidifying his influence. He's a master of playing the long game, and a compromise peace offers him ample opportunities to sow discord and exploit vulnerabilities. He'll be watching, waiting, and scheming, always looking for an opportunity to advance his own ambitions. He might even try to turn Sansa against Robb, whispering doubts and fueling her ambition, hoping to use her as a pawn in his larger game. Of course, things could always go south, quite literally. What if negotiations break down entirely? What if Cersei's influence remains too strong, or Tommen, perhaps emboldened by some perceived advantage, decides to crush the Northern Rebellion once and for all? In this worst-case scenario, war continues to rage across Westeros. The Lannister armies, reinforced by the Tyrells, march north, determined to bring the rebellious Starks to heel. Robb, outnumbered and outgunned, is forced to wage a desperate defensive war. He might employ guerrilla tactics, harassing the Lannister forces and disrupting their supply lines. He might even seek alliances with unconventional forces, perhaps. The mountain clans or even the Ironborn, a risky proposition given their reputation for treachery. But ultimately, the odds are stacked against him. The Lannisters have superior resources and manpower. They can afford to sustain heavy losses, while the North is slowly bleeding dry. In this scenario, the war becomes increasingly brutal and destructive. The Riverlands, caught in the crossfire, are ravaged by both Lannister and Stark forces. Villages are burned, crops are destroyed, and countless civilians are killed or displaced. Robb, forced to make increasingly difficult choices, becomes hardened and ruthless, willing to sacrifice everything to protect his people. Roslin, pregnant and fearful for her child's future, pleads with Robb to seek a peaceful resolution. Arya, fueled by rage and a desire for revenge, becomes a formidable warrior, leading raids against Lannister camps and striking fear into the hearts of her enemies. Sansa, caught between her loyalty to her family and her memories of King's Landing, struggles to reconcile her conflicting emotions. Catelyn, consumed by grief and regret, becomes increasingly withdrawn, haunted by the ghosts of her past. As for Littlefinger, well, he thrives in chaos. He uses the ongoing conflict to further consolidate his power in the Vale, playing both sides against each other and profiting from the suffering of others. He might even offer Robb assistance, providing him with weapons and supplies, but always at a price, always with an eye towards his own long-term goals. He's the puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows, and the war is just another opportunity for him to advance his own ambitions. The final fates of Robb, Roslin, and the other key characters in this scenario are bleak, to say the least. Robb might die in battle, leading a desperate charge against the Lannister lines. Roslin might perish during childbirth, a victim of the war's disruption of medical care. Arya, consumed by vengeance, might be killed in a reckless act of defiance. Sansa, captured by the Lannisters, might be forced to marry another political pawn, her life a constant struggle for survival. Catelyn, broken and defeated, might simply fade away, succumbing to despair. The North, crushed and occupied, would be subjected to Lannister rule, its people forced to endure years of oppression and hardship. This is the darkest timeline, a grim reminder of the brutal realities of war and the devastating consequences of political ambition. Regardless of which path our alternate timeline takes, the future remains uncertain. The Game of Thrones is a complex tapestry of alliances, betrayals, and unexpected twists. Even with Robb making the seemingly correct decision, the forces of ambition and chaos are always at play, ready to unravel even the most carefully laid plans. The Iron Throne remains a prize worth fighting for, and the struggle for power will continue with or without the Starks. And while Robb's choice to honor his oath to the Freys might have averted one red wedding, it's important to remember that in the world of Westeros, another storm is always brewing on the horizon. So, what do you think would happen? Let me know in the comments below.